Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. Excellent. Right. Excellent. Hello, everyone who is maybe watching one day in the future when we're really big and famous on podcasts. Everyone's looking at us, and I'm like, what the fuck were they doing back then?
True.
Yeah.
Hello, future.
Hello in the future. Alrighty. You ready?
I'm ready.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Impractical Spirituality. My name is Forrest Greenwell.
And I'm Amanda Bayoko.
And today we're going to talk about Samhain, otherwise known as Samhain, as I've called it for many, many years, because I didn't know how it was pronounced. Samhain is what we know in the big old world as Halloween. Yeah. So I guess I'll start by, kind of explaining what this is. So we have the All Hallows Eve, we've got Halloween, and then we have Samhain. And Samhain is more of like the Wiccan or pagan tradition. It's part of their harvests and all that fun stuff. So in pagan traditions, there's like 8 points that we celebrate. So there's like the turning of a season and then like the height of a season. And so Samhain is like the height of autumn. And if we also look at traditional Chinese medicine and we look at the season that we're in, we're in the season of the metal element, it's when the thinning of the veil starts to happen. We have this whole time period, not just on Samhain, when we're letting our ancestors in. And we're like, okay, yeah, cool, let's like see those thin veils. Let's feel all the things and see more things out of the corners of our eyes and get more messages and have weird dreams and, all that fun stuff. And it's really, a celebration of those thinning veils and of the height of harvest season and really going, okay, so how can we honor this? How can we get deep into it? And it's a Gaelic tradition, so it started yonder. But yeah, they used to have like circles where they would chant and dance and sing and invite spirits in and gods, and they had these really elaborate functions, kind of maybe if you think of like a maypole and how people would like dance around the maypole. It was kind of like that, but because we're working with like spiritual realms, they have like candles and lights and stuff like that. So kind of these like ethereal energies that would create patterns in like, I don't know, I'm like in the sky, but like just like in
space-time.
Yeah, literally in space-time in our realms. And it would act as like a doorway and we could invite people in. And we also have traditions like in Mexico where they celebrate the dead there. So it's pretty diverse. It's interesting because there's something that shows up for like Halloween and like all cultures. But the way that it's celebrated is really different, and I want to talk a little bit about that today. Yeah.
I'm not familiar, to be honest. I was researching a little bit before. You seem to hit all the good points there about like it being Celtic tradition or Gaelic, you said?
Gaelic, Celtic,
pagan,
all
of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how we sort of like practice witchcraft in our sort of modern culture without even really realizing where the roots come from, or like not practice like witchcraft, but dressing up in costume and all those things, like some of these parts of Halloween that we all sort of know is like that hallmark holiday and what they're actually grounded and rooted in, I think is pretty interesting.
It's really interesting. Yeah, the costumes come from wanting to disguise ourselves. They're like, oh man, we're letting other things in here and we want to not be taken away into like in Celtic traditions. Like they believe in fairies and stuff like that, and fairies are not a chill entity. And
from what I've heard, they're not. No. You gotta be real nice to the fairies.
Yeah, fairies will fuck stuff up. I'm watching Outlander, which is really interesting because they have a lot of like pagan traditions in them. But it's also like a show where like when you go back into it, they're like, burn the witches, which is a whole other can of worms. But yeah, it's really cool, and I think that people are now starting to pick up on it more, and they're like, okay, cool, like the traditional like Halloween, people like dressing up. I think that's a part of it. And I think that any kind of holiday where you get to be a version of yourself that you really want is really exciting. I think that's also why people choose really like sexy costumes, because we live in a culture that
Shames
commodifies
that shit.
Yeah, and
it's like permission.
Yeah,
to be. Yeah,
exactly. And now I think it's, well, not now, but like I think there's also a side of it where it's like, okay, do I get permission to be a witch? Can I like kind of try this on? And how I see it for myself is not only trying on like a costume, if you will, but like trying on powers, really being like, okay, like how can I step into this? What does it look like to, bring all of this energy into the world? And it's kind of that like point of like, okay, so yeah, when we're in autumn, we're getting ready for winter, and then we're like turning into that. So it's like, okay, so what are the preparations, not only in the world but within ourselves, to do that too? And I think that like when we think of turning inwards, we think that we're by ourselves, but I don't think that's what it is. At least not in my mind. I think that Samhain is kind of this invitation to be like, all right, we're gonna open the veil, and like you're gonna be able to commune with spirits and ancestors and all that. And then it's like, okay, well, what sticks with you? And what are you gonna bring with you and work with through these colder seasons? And I always find that the winter for me is deeply spiritual. Maybe that's also because I'm really sad and there's nothing else for me to work with in that way. But I think that it's a really powerful energy. Yeah,
it can be like, it kind of mimics like a death energy in a way, right? And I feel like when I was reading about Samhain and what you mentioned about it, like marking the harvest, I think I've always kind of felt this sort of pull towards more ancestral ways of honoring like nature and the seasons and those things. And I think I have a lot of respect for these practices, because there is this like reverence for, they were talking about like animal sacrifice and things like that to honor the harvest. And I just think we've lost some of that reverence for the very basic things that nourish us and keep us going, like just as simple as like honoring and being in reverence to the food that we put inside of our bodies. Like we've lost a little bit of that. So I think it's an interesting return to that mindset and that outlook by pulling from traditions that have been in the past, basically. I'm sure that's something they still do in Celtic countries now.
100%.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and like it's a Celtic word,
right?
So like they still like that's when you look at it and you're like, how do I say that? Yeah, so there is a lot more reverence, and I think that there are a lot of people who believe that Halloween is like run by commercial companies, but I'm also like, that's also literally every holiday that we have. It's Christmas, it's Easter, and if you look back at the roots of these things, all of them are rooted in pagan traditions. Every single one. Because
really?
Yeah, because that's like what we had. So like Christianity took them and was like, we're just gonna switch those around for ourselves. So like Easter was a pagan tradition, Halloween was a pagan tradition, and Christmas is a pagan tradition. Like all of these go back, and if you look at the dates that they happen on, it happens at these monumental times of shift in our years, or of reverence in our years. And I just think that it's also a really lovely way to transition. I think that having all these celebrations kind of makes life a little less, like, not less bleak, but like, it's just like, oh, okay, things are happening and there are patterns to everything, and asking yourself what those patterns are and like how they show up. And I also think that it's really interesting that it happens during Scorpio season. I think about that sometimes, because Scorpio is really this like getting to the heart of it sign. And even though it's like, well, it's like opposing forces, right? It's like a water sign that's ruled by Mars, it's ruled by fire. So it's like, oh, okay, like what happens when we have these two, like we see them as opposing forces, if you will, but they create bridges, right? So it's like, okay, so what is that bridge that we open up to get there? And I think it's also interesting that like if we think about like fire and water, it's like, okay, then we have jack-o'-lanterns and we put little candles in them, and I don't quite remember, but I think that like jack-o'-lanterns and like carving pumpkins and stuff was like meant to scare away spirits or something like that. Like it was a really interesting, like there's a reason behind everything. Yeah. And like, how we have candy, we hand that out. It's almost like like the abundance that we all have to share with everyone, and kind of going around and being like, okay, like, do you want to participate in this? Like, how can we share our abundance with each other and also make that abundance last too? Because everyone has something different to offer. You go to every different house and we all have a different candy, or every farmer, every person would have different foods to offer for the harvest, to help each other get through the season. Yeah, and so I think that now we don't really have the same kind of celebration where we're like, okay, let's get all the pumpkins and the gourds and do all that. And, we have Thanksgiving now, which It's a whole other topic that we will not get into right now, but it's just colonial bullshit. Colonial settler bullshit. But yeah, I think that Samhain is something that's being reclaimed by a lot of people, and we're finding a lot more like spiritual reverence for it. Like I know that I have like been developing rituals for myself over that time, and it's also Fiend's birthday. I chose it on purpose. I was like, yeah, like the day when the realms are like the veil between the realms are the thinnest. Yeah, I think I'll have that energy going on, and you know, embracing being surrounded by our ancestors as well. And I think we were talking about it like a while ago, maybe over Instagram, but just like how many ancestors we all actually have.
Right.
It's a lot. It's like thousands and thousands and thousands, and we don't think about that because we only know like back so far.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like you said about the building the bridge. There's like many bridges that come through at this time. Like you said, like there's that bridge between the sort of earthly realm and the spirit realm, and then that sort of bridge between seasons. I feel like the biggest shift in seasons is like fall to winter, winter to spring, right? The other ones sort of like ebb and flow very nicely into each other, but there's a very drastic shift. And I feel that, it's a good marker of time, like you're saying, to have a moment to stop and honor. We used to live much more with the seasons, and I feel like, we've just lost touch from a lot of it. So I appreciate any sort of practice that's going to bring us back to, I think I just said this basically, like back to the earth in a lot of ways. Like I feel that especially in our like North American Western culture, there's not a lot of that, and it comes up a lot. I don't know. I feel like it's a big thing that we need to start to incorporate back into our lives for many reasons. Like I could go on and on, but many reasons.
Well, I think that like if you think about the fact that like, you know, living in cities is a very new thing to the development of humans, we're a little bit out of touch with nature as well. So having something that grounds us and that reminder of like, okay, you're allowed to turn inwards now, and these are things that are happening. Like I think that, you know, a part of why this is going to be a hot take, but I think part of why we have like things like seasonal depression and stuff like that, they're on like such a high like upswing of people having them, is because we're so disconnected. It's because we don't pay attention. We don't know how to pay attention. So our bodies are like, hi, yeah, biologically, don't know what's going on here anymore.
I mean, I had the same hot take that you did, kind of thing. Like they talk about how digestion really starts with like before we even start eating, right? So it's like this process of if we're not like consciously like letting our body know and like having it be aware and connected to those seasons, maybe it can feel like winter kind of comes out of nowhere. And that's where that like pain comes from, I guess, where if we're actually like in the change of the season and walking with it as it's happening, then we're digesting sort of thing in October and November for the true digestion of winter. If that
100%, absolutely. Yeah, because it's not coming as a shock. We're not resisting it.
Exactly.
We're not like, no, it's all going to be fine. I'm going to wear no tights and mini skirts while it's like 4 degrees out. And, you know, and then suddenly it's -4 and you're like, what's going on? That was me as a teenager anyways. I don't know. But.
Oh, yeah. You definitely hit a point where you're like, I'm too cool to be warm. And then you're like, I don't care about that anymore.
Yeah,
and
I'm too cool to be dead.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Too cool to be dead. Yeah, true.
I don't know, just a hot take.
Yeah,
another one, but
I like it.
But yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Like having that like preparation period, and also I think that, you know, not a lot of people like winter. People are really resistant to it, and it's because we're not prepared for it. People are like, I don't want to wear a warm coat. I don't want to do this and change all of this, or we just forget about it. We get so caught up in our lives, and suddenly Christmas is happening, and we need to go and buy presents for people. We get caught up in that whirlwind, and I think that's also like, you know, we live in a society that simultaneously disengages us from what's really going on, but then pushes us into the future. And so it's like, don't be engaged with this moment, but just remember that Christmas is coming, and that's what you're thinking about. And then these things come, and we've had no time to prepare for them or to dive into them or to actually sink into it. And I think that it's kind of like, it's like sort of similar with Samhain, but like I think that people are really excited for this idea of Halloween. But I think that like when we think about Samhain, we think about like these ancestors. I think it's also honoring old parts of ourselves too, and I think that can be really hard. And I think that people are prepared for that, you know. And I think that's also why like Halloween is such like a time for partying as well, because people are like, I want to like not that like it's conscious, but I think that people wanted to know of that, you know. And it's very fun. I mean, I love dressing up. Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with any of that. I would highly encourage it, but I think it's really that asking of like, okay, so why are we doing this, and why? What is the reverence here? What are we getting out of it? Do we want to get anything out of it? Are we actually conscious and present with it? You know, when people are thinking about Halloween, they're just like purely thinking about what costumes they're going to be dressing up as. You know, it's not like, okay, like, you know, what am I dressing up as now in my life? Like, who am I, and like, who do I want to be? And how I guess kind of been seeing Samhain as like is like this invitation of like, okay, like you have this time now to step into like a new power, a bigger power. You get to try that on, and then you spend the winter like growing into that. That's kind of how I see it. And like when I look back, like the winter is the time that I've always written in punishment books, which is really interesting. It's like this time to like go in and be like, okay, cool. Who have I been over the past 2 years? Or, you know, the first one was like 6 years or something like that. And I was like, okay, who have I been over this time period? And like, how does that conglomerate into who I am now? And really asking ourselves and being conscious about the fact that we actually get to choose, and that we don't just have our power to draw from. I think that's a really cool part of it too. We have this otherworldly, or I shouldn't say otherworldly, I think it's of this world, but like this like kind of energy that we forget about. Like again, like on the other side of the veil, like what happens when you actually open the curtains and you're like, oh, it's a nice day out. Okay, there's stuff going on out there. And yeah, realizing that there is this whole other world that has all this energy that's like literally just waiting for us to come and embrace it. And I think we also have access to this at all times of the year. Like I don't think that the worlds are just like, and the gates are closed, come back next time, see you later, like you didn't make it back, sorry. But I think it's like one of the easiest times to do it.
I feel like the environment supports it at this time of year as well, right? And I feel like you said so many things that I want to like. I like this idea. Maybe I'm hoping I'm hearing what you're saying properly, but this idea of maybe like exploring the different costumes that we put on in our lives, and like maybe flipping that, and also considering that power and that excitement that we might feel about dressing up for Halloween, for example, like is an energy that we can bring to our lives every day. And I think that so many people get so into Halloween because it's a time where they can truly express themselves in a world where maybe they don't feel that they can do that. And so it's also about like, yeah, calling forth that energy of creation, which has been like on my mind and like in the atmosphere, I feel, for a lot of people. And I feel like that kind of segues into my next point that I wanted to touch on, what you said of sort of like winter, you go inward. And it's like sort of this like hibernation, that there might be this like cultivation of energy. Like that's what I heard of what you were just saying, is like you sit down and you gather yourself back in and then you examine, right? And I feel like this sort of creation and destruction cycle, or like life and death, is kind of what I was reading about with Samhain, is that they divide the year into two parts, like light and dark. And Samhain is sort of this introduction into the dark part of the year. And so, you know, it mirrors like life and death, and the cycle of the seasons, and the cycle of our bodies, and this idea that we have to move through that darkness to get back into the light, and that there's a lot of goodness in the darkness. And I think in a myriad of ways we are afraid of the dark, like the actual dark, our inner dark, each other's darkness, whatever you want to call it, is we we shy away from it, or we run away from it in a lot of instances. So I feel like a ritual to honor that sort of movement into the darkness, as almost like you said, we're not doing it alone, like we're holding hands as we move into that darkness, even if we're going inward. You know what I mean? Like you do work on your own, but you're supported by the processes and the people around you. I think it's interesting to look at the times of years as like portals for those changes and insights. And if there is any sort of portal, like Halloween is definitely one, you know, for sure, because we really truly are moving into a different environment, space and time, I guess.
Yeah, I can feel it. I can feel it big time.
Yeah.
And it's like funny because even though I know these things, I still feel some resistance to it. I'm like, I don't want to go there. But I think that like also we associate like darkness and shadow with like sadness and fear and anger and like these really like hard to deal with things. And I think that it can be that, but I think it can also be a time to like decompress and like be quiet and be okay with that. And like, and I think when like, you know, I think about like Celtic traditions and they're like dancing with their fire and stuff like that. It's like how can we do that? How can we weave paths of light for ourselves so that, like, even though we're in the darkness, it's still illuminated? And like, what is illuminating that? And like, how can we be in those spaces? Because it's not like we go all year and like winter and it's just there's no light at all. Like, that's not how it is, right? It's like there's a lot less of it, but there's a lot more space, I think. And I think that having that space can, like that, or I guess that transference of space can be jarring for people who want to be outputting externally, or are very accustomed and told that this is what we're supposed to do.
Yes,
And to accept, like, oh, I can do less, and I want to do less, and I actually need to do less, or at least less in the way that we think of it, right? Because I think it's actually less work. I think that turning inwards is a lot of work in some ways.
In its own way, absolutely.
And people are cultivating the skills, especially if you haven't surrendered to that process. It takes a lot of energy to allow yourself to surrender. It's
you spend a lot of energy like working against it. You don't even realize it, right? Like,
it's like holding your grip.
Exactly. Yeah, I feel like too, something that what you were just saying about sort of internal energy versus external. I also feel like with Samhain and the honoring of the harvest, like the winter was also a time traditionally where ancestrally they didn't really do a lot of work, right? Like there was a very much of a turning inwards. There, the farming and the stewarding of the land was for the spring, the summer, and the fall. So this really was a time of slowing down that I think, in our current day, we don't get that same slowing. So I feel like that's also why there's so much resistance to winter, because to do our lives in the winter, at least where we live, is like, it's challenging in a lot of its most basic ways. And it can be dangerous, and you just have this instinct to want to stay inside. And I think that our environment doesn't support our truest nature in a lot of ways. And our truest nature is connected to the seasons and the weather and all of those things. And when we're sort of taught, like you said, to sort of continue to push through those things that aren't really meant to be pushed through, it creates a sort of dissonance, and we're not resonant with that true nature, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like we become disconnected, and I think that's why we get sad and angry and feel lonely, because we're not able to listen to ourselves. We're not able to turn inwards and go, oh, this is what I really need, because the world does not facilitate it. We don't have this time where the demands for needing to pay your internet bill go down, or we still need to go and get groceries and go out into the world and do all these things, and and then we have like this 2-week period of just being like, it's holidays, get your family together. Oh my god, it's so exhausting, because they're like, it's gonna be so restful to go and be with your whole family, and you have to spend all of your money and all of your time and travel in really fucked up conditions, and it's gonna be great. And you're like, what? Why are we doing this right now? Because when we think of like more spring and summer traditions, they are about collecting and gathering and being with each other. And like, I feel like Samhain is kind of that last big huzzah. And I think that we're supposed to be in those more quiet and intimate moments, and generate, like, I don't know, I think like love for those intimate moments of our lives. I remember when Jeremy and I started dating, like we spent that whole winter just holed up in his apartment. It was the best. It was like
so nice.
It was so nice. It was one of the most tender times of our relationship. And the way that the electrical grid worked was that, like, at the place that we both worked, the power would go out there, but he was on the hospital grid, so we would just go home and like make grilled cheeses, and we'd be like, oh, we don't have to work. It was so good. So like the power would be out in the city, and we'd be like, sit in bed all day with Frankie, and I think that we're like, I don't think that we can just be like, oh, just don't work during the winter, it's fine.
I mean, goals, but
100%. But I think it is really about being like, okay, like, you don't have to go to the gym as much. Like, actually, your body wants you to have more fat on it, because it's cold outside if you live in Canada or like the Northern Hemisphere, or like this part of the Northern Hemisphere. So, I guess in the Southern Hemisphere. Anyways, you guys know what I mean. If you live in a place where it gets cold, you need more fat on your body. And just like how we function in everything needs to change. It's not even just like the weather is making things difficult. It's that we don't want to admit that we have to alter what it is that we've gotten set down. And I think that's also because for the rest of the year, we ignore moving with the seasons and we resist that. And then we finally get into a place for like a month where we're like, everything feels good. All these things I've been working towards, they work. And then we go into another phase and we want to hold on to that instead of adjusting and moving with it. And it is impossible to sustain in a way that nourishes us, in my opinion.
I agree.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a resistance to cyclical living for some reason at like every level. Like that's all I can really think about right now is like, you know, what you just said basically is like, and I keep thinking is we have to be mindful about these celebrations and what we're bringing to them and what they're giving to us and how we can approach them. And I feel like if you're more, I've said this before, but for even my personal cycle, like as a woman, until I really knew about it and was mindful about it, it ran my life in a way that was unconscious. And I assumed that as part of who I was. Like I really took it on as like a character flaw or whatever it might be. And so there was a resistance and an inability to surrender, whether it was through a lack of knowledge or whatever. And, you know, the minute that you actually turn towards that cycle and you notice its patterns and you accept its influence on your life, like there's actually an opening up and a widening of your perspective and your abilities and your eagerness to cope and to learn yourself. And so now I know that during specific parts of my cycle, I should probably stay inside or whatever it might be, you know, like how we are kind of saying that we should learn to honor ourselves and our needs in those different cycles externally. I had to do that internally, and that shift was impactful in a really big way.
I feel that big time. I actually, after I cried last night a lot, I was like, oh, the new moon's on Friday. Oh, I'm in my autumn right now. Oh, this all makes sense. And it's like one of those things where once I tune into it, I feel so much less resistance about it. And there are those moments where like, yeah, you're like in your spring, your summer, or whatever, you're in those easier times to just like flow with yourself. And then that hits and it's like, why am I sad again? I don't understand. I thought I had it figured out. That's what my brain does anyway. And you know, I realized like, oh, okay, this is actually normal, and like I need to release these things, and it's okay if I need to slow down and I want to sleep in until 10:30. You know, it's just, yeah, that like recognition. I also find that like my subconscious, when I let it, will come through more strongly too, or with more strength. So like my dreams this week have been bananas,
Popping.
Absolutely bonkers. I'm like, why is this it? Like I had one where I was cleaning the microwave, like pristinely cleaning the microwave, and I was like, why this dream?
Yeah,
and then my next one was like in the and then Jeremy got like brain tumors and was going crazy, and yeah, it was this whole thing, and I was like, okay, like what is this? And it's just like, you know, our subconscious is always going to make up stories, and it's going to take all this information, and it's going to like lay it out in a way where it's like, okay, now you've digested that, but we don't pay attention to it a lot of the time. And I think that just in that respect, like I think that like Samhain and like these kind of like times where we are starting to slow down are a time to digest. And like you were saying, like when you're thinking about like wanting to eat, like you need that time beforehand when you're thinking about it or you're preparing the food and your body's getting ready for it. And I think that's part of it too, because if we don't let ourselves digest these things, we don't let ourselves have the crazy dreams, or we don't let ourselves talk about the hard things, then when we go into those places, that's what we're dealing with. We're not doing the becoming, we're doing the unbecoming. And I think that the unbecoming is what happens first. And that's really hard. It's hard to unbecome. It's hard to let those things go. It's hard to allow yourself to unravel all of that, to see what it is you're working with. But it's also really liberating when you let it happen. And I think that's part of why celebrations like this are so beautiful and also necessary, because it gives us a moment to be like, oh, again, not alone. We can do this together. There's a purpose to all of this. And I think having any kind of ritual really adds reverence to it. You know, we can have this appreciation for what's happening. And I think that's what Samhain's supposed to be. It's this appreciation for the energy that is inevitable. And how when we have appreciation and we have reverence and we do sink into these things, that we can actually work with those energies. And not to say that like it has to be just like, this is the work I'm going to do on myself and I'm going to go and like become all these things. But I think that even keeping ourselves open and being like, I have no idea what I'm going to become, and that's okay, but I'm ready to release, or I'm preparing myself to come up against things that I'm going to release, and that might be painful. You know, like taking a splinter out is never fun, but it feels really good when it's out of there. I think that that's us too. And like, there's a lot of friction in the world. There's a lot of friction in the world that we live in and the way that we live through it. And I think that we have these like little shards within us. And I think that like taking those out and giving yourself time to repair and heal and figure out like, okay, like now that I have all this crap that I've taken out of me, like what we're going to do with it. And it is a time to make really like beautiful things, not like physical things. I think just like how sometimes like keeping things private can be really beautiful, you know, and not having this worry of the external gaze. For example, sometimes in the summer, specifically when I'm writing, all I can think about is how other people are going to perceive it and how I'm writing for other people. And it's like, okay, like we're in this very externalized season about connecting with other people, and it feels very like, okay, like I'm not even doing this for myself. But then when I come into these like slower seasons of like autumn and winter, I'm really able to tune into, oh, what is it that I need to write for myself, and like where's the beauty in that, and knowing that you can 100% share those things, but that privatization of knowing that we're in the dark, you know, and like not even like literally, but I think metaphorically we're in the dark, and that can be really wonderful. There's also something that I think I've talked about it before, but it's about like just like where we're at in our understanding and being in the light or in the dark about like, you know, where it is that we're at. And it's kind of applied to like talking about like situations that are more challenging to talk about, more vulnerable to talk about. But I think that being in the dark is a chance for us to explore, but it feels really scary because sometimes you're like at the top of the staircase and you're like, well, I don't know where the light switch is, so I guess we're just gonna go down there and hope I don't fall on the face while I'm doing it. And it's this invitation to know that like, you know, maybe when the light's on we can run down the stairs, and when the light's off we can sit on our bums and just go down the slope and know that like we don't need to have this resistance, we don't need to have this friction, or that if it is there, that, you know, there are things that we can do to change that. We don't need to show up in the same way. And yeah, I just think that Samhain is kind of that gateway into opening up into all of that and like finding a place where we can celebrate that instead of finding resistance for it. Because I think for a lot of people, and even for me and a lot of my life, Halloween was that last mark of like freedom in a way. I was like, okay, and then after this, like it all goes downhill until spring comes back. And you know, shifting perspective in that way can be really fruitful.
I agree. I feel connected to what you just said, and I think that, you know, in the same way that you're sort of talking about being able to look forward, that there is this marking of, you know, where it, from what I have read and understand, like it's an acknowledgement of the harvest that was.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, part of, you know, as you said, like unbecoming and becoming is acknowledging who you already are. And like to unbecome, you have to kind of already know, like you have to know what you're letting go. And so I think there is like, it's layered in that. I always think that we don't spend enough time like sitting with in the present moment of what we've already done.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of always focusing on forward motion, and I feel like there is this energy of pause, of like, look at this bountiful abundance that I have created through harvest or work through that sort of external time, and an acknowledgement of like, okay, I am turning inward, and look where I've gone, and you know, this is where I will now head, kind of thing. And that sort of a pause for even just a day to, I think that's the veil really is like this sort of pause between where you have been and acknowledging and having gratitude and reverence for that, with an acknowledgement that there is a future that is in front of you, and that you actually have much more control over that future than you might think. And I think, you know, that sort of internal contentedness comes from tapping more into that sort of flow and that cycle at any point in the year. But I just feel like this is what is sort of coming up right now as we're discussing this. Just having reverence for the work that you have done. I was having a conversation with a girlfriend today who was like, I just feel like I need to be productive today, but that's not really what I want. And it's like, okay, well then don't do it. You know, like we have this idea that we have to be productive. And I think that that's something that we can learn from the people who came before us, is that they did stop working. And I know that we've already said, like, we can't stop working. It's the society that we live in. But there are things that we can, you know, do, and to pare down our responsibilities throughout the seasons to honor what we need, right? And I've been trying to think of, like, we have all these balls in the air that we're juggling at all times. And some of those balls are glass and some of them are plastic. So it's like, which balls can we let drop for now until we have time and energy to incorporate them back in? yeah, I just think it's good to reflect on all of those things and see what they bring forward as a path, right? Because when we can consider those things, when we're stuck on something or we don't know which way is forward, when we actually give ourselves the time and space to sit with where we've been and acknowledge how we're feeling, we might actually find that path in those feelings, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, it's giving me an opportunity to feel the things, like you said, like that's what we're here to do, and that's actually how we move forward in a heart-centered way to build a life, I guess.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of reminds me of like the Queen and King of Pentacles.
Ooh, tell
A
me.
lot, yeah. So like the queens are the nurturers and the kings are the boundary makers. So they work together to be like, okay, how can we nourish ourselves? And yeah, what are the boundaries of that? And so the queen, the idea there is that sometimes abundance comes through restriction. So sometimes you need to put a plant in a pot and let it become root bound before it can actually be planted into, the ground or into a bigger thing. Sometimes we have these things in our lives that are growing like in they're growing, but it's like straggling, if you will. So like we're seeing it, but we're like, haha, you're not like flourishing, and how we have to have this knowledge and this understanding of when to keep things root bound, when to keep things in their pots, when they will survive in our lives, when we have actually the energy to do it. We're not going to take something that's root bound and then plant it before winter because it's not going to survive. So it's like, okay, sometimes there are parts of ourselves where we have to understand that like it's still growing and it's fine, it's flourishing, and it's not the time to like put that out into the world, and that's okay. And there are times to cut back on things. So like when I think of something straggling, I would think of like a pothos or an ivy, and how like they get these long, really long, just like one-off vines, and how when you cut the end of that off, it diverges. It becomes more than one. It becomes two or three or however many it is. And from there, you also get like a clipping, if you will. So sometimes, we think of like cutting things off as losing something, but it's like, no, you have opportunity to plant that in another way and to reutilize that energy. Or even when things are dying, it's like, leaves are falling off the trees. Great. That's what's going to make the leaves green when spring comes. So yeah, this idea of like abundance through restriction, and how we have to sometimes restrict our energy, restrict the things that we do, and where it is that we put our energy in order to cultivate more strength in those things. And the king is the boundary maker, and it's this understanding that like abundance isn't just reaping the harvest. Abundance is having the harvest, making the wine, drinking the wine, planting the seeds again, going through all of that. And it's understanding that there's going to be a time when the markets are open and we're like calling people in and we're like, hi, yeah, we're trading, we've got all this stuff going on, like, give us your seeds, or give us your pumpkins, or whatever that is, give us your grapes. And there's a time when everyone's bundled up in their castles and they're like, okay, cool, like the gates to the market are closed now, that's fine. And it's like this idea of, okay, what is our energy worth to us? Because I don't think that we think about that a lot.
That's a big one.
It is a big one. Like, what is your energy worth to you actually? How do you take care of that?
I think the idea that our energy even has value is like foreign to most of us.
100%, absolutely. And I think that when we can like realize, oh, my energy does have value, and that value is intrinsic, but also how that value is cultivated changes. It's this idea of, okay, like you're not going to be able to pull more grapes from the vines and make more wine in winter. And I think it's also this idea of like conservation in a way too. It's like understanding what it is that you have, being very mindful with what it is that you have, sharing it, of course, but also recognizing that like, like I always see like my little community, it's like my little town, my little village, and I'm like, I don't need to care for other people's villages right now. I don't need to serve everyone else. It's not my job. It's my job to do that. And if like when time comes, people want to come in and they want to trade seeds and they want to get stuff and the stuff that we're doing, that's fine. Like there's a time for expansion and growth, and there's also a time for turning inwards and really figuring out what's in that storm and how it is that you want to go. And also like we need time to plan things. And I think that we forget about that. Like winter is biologically a time for us to like plan what's going to go on with ourselves and in our lives, and how it is that we want to move forward. And I think it's really interesting also to think about like, I don't know, just like, I don't know if this is true, but just like how many people get pregnant in the winter, and like,
I don't know if this is true.
But like,
true. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, cause it's like, we're not doing anything else with our energy. Our energy is like, like reproduce. Like, you know, like this is the time where you're not putting energy
Yeah.
into other things. You're not trying to like till the land and harvest all the fruits and do all that stuff. Like all you have is like what is right here. And so it's kind of this idea of like, okay, yeah, like what seeds are you planting, or what seeds are you cultivating or drying out to move forward. Even this idea of like wintering your seeds. So it's like letting things that you've taken in from the harvest and believe that they're out in nature and that they're gonna like grow again, kind of thing. It's like, okay, how do we take our ideas or our energy? Like, okay, so I actually don't have the space for you right now, but I'm gonna let you cultivate. I'm gonna let you do your thing. You're in the back burner, and I know that you're doing your stuff. I don't need to worry about you. I don't need to go and do like 100 different projects right now. We can like, you know, wrap all this stuff up, or, you know, do the repairs on the inside of the castle so that you can, you know, when the season comes to like be outside, you're not worried about your walls falling down. And I think that that's really important too, because it is this time of like recreating like safety for ourselves in a way. It's like, what is it that keeps you safe? What holes do you need to patch in yourself? And like that can be really jarring sometimes to realize you have a whole fucking wall crumbling down. But it's also, you know, really beautiful. We have the time to do that. We also realize that like, yeah, like I said, like time is a resource, energy is a resource. Like, what is the value behind that, and how do these things end up working for you in the future? And I think that when we're looking at Samhain and that veil, it's like stepping into that room of like, okay, now it's time to like turn inwards and time to like also release the notion that we have to be, doing things in the outside, whatever that looks like for you, whether it's literal or physical or metaphysical.
For sure. I feel like, yeah, there's so much there. Like there's a potential for so much. And I feel like especially with the full moon on it this year, it's like extra special kaplamo power.
The second full moon of the month.
I know. I just feel like this one is the one. So I feel like I'm curious about what you have planned for Samhain. Like I kind of know, but like I want I want to know more.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, Samhain is Fiend's first birthday, and I have like a harvest planned. So I've reached out to some local businesses, and we're going to be getting some catering from them. I want to just like have like a full on like ritual celebration, and I want people to like not to dress up in costumes, but like dress up as like your highest self. That's like really what it is in my mind. So I'm like, if you want to wear like a wedding dress, go for it. I don't care. Like whatever it is that makes you feel like so in your power. And I have like some card reading things set up. I have like basically just like a full ritual for all the people that come and want to honor it. So I have some candle things set up and some runes and some sound things if that warrants it. I don't know, but I really want to work with like the thinning of the veil and like what it is that we feel when we're there. Like a meditation to go into like like to meet with our ancestors and stuff like that. It's not like I shouldn't say it's not fully solidified, but it's like hard to be like, and then we're gonna do this and this will be.
No.
But I really want to like make a tradition out of it. Like I want to go into that like old school, like okay, like we're not trick or treating, we're like like looking at like I think the way that we trick ourselves and the way that we treat ourselves.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah. And like almost like tricking ourselves into like slowing that down. So I think some of it's going to be like a releasing of energy. It's going to be meeting with the energies that are in the world, kind of bringing in some things to help us support ourselves, whatever that looks like for all the individuals who attend, and like really making a like true celebration out of it that isn't about getting drunk. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not what I feel like. I don't want to be obliterated. I feel like I want to be really present for what's going on in the world and like the power that's there. Like it's such a powerful time. It really is. You can feel the potency of that energy, and that's really valuable, I think. And I don't think that a lot of people have a community where they don't have to dress up in a plastic costume. They got it something that they might never wear again, and they really get to go, okay, like who actually am I? And I think that's the biggest question, like who are you, and also like who do you want to be, and like allowing that kind of like transference to happen, and then like making spells. It's
It's gonna be fun.
It's gonna be really fun.
I feel like too it's like an opportunity for you as the owner of this space to like sit with the harvest that you created for yourself through, this little portal on Agricola. It's on Agricola, right?
It is on Agricola.
Okay.
Yeah. I know. I've been doing that lately. I'm like,
where am I? Who are we?
I don't know if like the student name's gonna change or something, but I've been like tuned out to what Agricola
Confirmed
is.
Agricola.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like you've done an amazing thing in the past year, and I think it can be hard to honor that work that we've done, and our instinct is maybe to reject that, but I hope that you're able to receive that, because there has been so much open to so many because of the creation that you set out to create.
Yeah, and I think it's also like there's a huge part of it that's like celebrating what I've made, and I think it's also like celebrating like who I've been able to become.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really, I think, like a potent part of it, because I get very caught up in all the things that I know that I can do and I will do, and looking back to just the beginning of this and kind of seeing things that just couldn't happen when we first opened, and now that I can do and that they have come into fruition and I have been able to grow into those things, and just how all of that was supported. I think that when I think about like the harvest of fiends, it's like it's not about what I've done, it's about what everyone else showed up to do, right? And I think that when you think of a harvest, it's like not one person doing everything, it's the whole team of people who get to do that. And fiends is a great idea, but like without the community, it's just an idea. And so
I was gonna say, it has its own energy that like everybody contributes to it.
Mm-hmm. So kind of showing up, and I think having everyone who does contribute to that in the space, and like being able to honor them too, because it's not just me, and it will never just be me. I don't want that, and I don't think that that is what it is. And being able to come to that place of like, hey, I'm celebrating all of you too, who trusted me and believed in me and showed up and did this. And I posted about this the other day, but like in not even a year, I've done over 500 readings. And that's pretty crazy. And just like thinking about that level of, I don't even want to say self-development, but like spiritual development, intuitive development is really just phenomenal to me. And like, I'm not saying that because I'm like, oh, I did all this, but it's like enough people trusted me to do that. And that's pretty special. That's a really like, I'm gonna cry. But yeah, it's just, it's really cool. And I think that I spent my whole life knowing that I was powerful and like that there was something out there. And I think that a lot of people feel that way. And it's not like I'm like, oh, I'm Oprah, but like, like I think that, I do have power. And I think that everyone deserves to feel like they have power and a place to utilize that power and grow it and really feel the strength of it. And like my power is not autonomous. It needs other people. I don't feel the same way when I'm reading for myself that I do when I'm reading for another, and that's for a good reason. And I really just want to, I guess, like thank everyone who showed up to let me be powerful. Like that's really fucking cool. There's nothing that blows me away more in the world than that. It's just yeah.
I think I probably speak for everybody else when I say like, I know it's not just you, but it is you too, right? And it's like, thank you for giving everybody else the space to be powerful, right? Like it's a reciprocal energy. And I think that, something beautiful has been created here, and it's just exciting to be able to celebrate. I think in a lot of ways there needs to be more of that energy, especially this year. I don't know. I'm just happy to be here and be a part of it myself.
I'm happy you're here.
Yeah.
It's amazing how there's all these little pieces and parts of it where I was like, I can't do that, but someone will be able to do that. And seeing the people actually come and do that and show up, and just because like they needed that space and it was available, or they needed someone else to remind them of how powerful they are, like I feel like at the end of the day, like I'm just kind of like a mirror for what everyone else holds within them. And like truly I am. I'm like, your cards are your cards. Like I can't make those show up in any way. Even though I'm laying the spread down, like it's your energy, and like even like the way that I interpret it, it's like it's not me. It's like, I don't know, something else out here. Whatever you are, holler.
I love you.
I'll be around on Samhain if you want to chat. Like let me know what's up. But I do feel like it is ancestral in a way. And I think that when I can take away that like almost like that selfishness of like autonomy of like I did this, it's like no, I'm just like I guess strong enough to hold that.
I was gonna say it's the difference between somebody who does and somebody who doesn't is like you got out of the way to.
Even the king, it's like, you know, like it takes a different kind of strength to like cut off the little ends and to